Ambassador Veltar of the Zephyrian hegemony stood in the pristine white corridors of the diplomatic station orbiting the third planet of the Sol system. His crystalline skin shimmered with barely contained disgust as he observed the crude metal walls and primitive lighting systems that these humans called advanced technology. The very air felt thick and oppressive, filled with the organic scents that these carbon-based life forms seemed to prefer. "Barbaric," he whispered to his aide, a smaller Zephyrian whose purple hue indicated his junior status. "Look at this place. They still use combustible fuels for transportation. Their cities belch toxic fumes into their own atmosphere. How such a primitive species survived this long on such a hostile world is beyond comprehension." The aide, Kexalon, nodded eagerly. "The preliminary reports were quite shocking, Ambassador. This planet they call Earth has gravity that would crush most civilized beings. Their weather systems include frozen precipitation that can kill, and storms with electrical discharges powerful enough to level buildings. The very air contains enough oxygen to cause combustion in most organic materials." Veltar's mandibles clicked in amusement. "And yet they thrive here. It simply proves that intelligence and civilization are not always connected. Brute survival instincts, nothing more." Down in the planet's capital of New Geneva, Admiral Sarah Chen of the United Earth Defense Force reviewed the diplomatic briefings with growing irritation. She had served in 3 colonial wars and survived the Titan mining disaster that claimed half her crew, but dealing with pompous alien diplomats was testing her patience in ways combat never had. "Ma'am," Lieutenant Torres said, looking up from his tablet, "the Zephyrian delegation has sent another list of suggestions for our meeting protocols." Chen raised an eyebrow. "Such as?" "They want us to wear atmosphere suits during negotiations because they find our natural scent offensive. They've also requested that we avoid any sudden movements, as they consider our reflexes unnervingly rapid and potentially threatening." The Admiral set down her coffee with more force than necessary. "Anything else?" "They want all weapons removed from a 50-kilometer radius around their shuttle landing site. They consider our standard sidearms to be weapons of mass destruction by their standards." Chen stood up, her chair scraping against the metal floor. At 45, she had earned every scar and medal through blood and determination. Her dark eyes held the kind of hardness that came from making life-and-death decisions while floating in the void of space. "Lieutenant, send a message back. Tell them that we'll meet their diplomatic requests when they stop treating us like children." Back on the station, Veltar was reviewing Earth's military capabilities with his tactical advisor, War Prime Zektoth. The larger Zephyrian's golden coloring marked him as a member of the warrior caste, though his idea of warfare involved highly coordinated fleet movements and energy weapons that could disable enemy ships without causing significant casualties. "Their largest vessels are primitive metal constructs," Zektoth reported, his voice carrying the melodic quality typical of his species: crude fusion drives, kinetic weapons, and what appears to be chemical explosives. Their fighters are piloted by biological entities rather than sophisticated AI systems. The largest ship in their fleet mounts what they call a particle cannon that could potentially damage one of our scout vessels. Veltar's skin shifted to a pleased blue-green. "Excellent. And their ground forces?" "Even more primitive. Individual soldiers carrying projectile weapons and wearing basic armor. They have vehicles that move on wheels or treads rather than proper graviton manipulation. Most concerning is their apparent willingness to accept casualties. Our psychological profiles suggest they don't value individual life the way civilized species do." "Typical Deathworld mentality," Veltar mused. "They probably don't understand that warfare in civilized space involves demonstrating superiority, not actually causing harm. A few disabled ships and they'll surrender quickly enough." Admiral Chen's shuttle docked with the station 6 hours later. She emerged wearing her dress uniform, the deep blue fabric marked with ribbons that told the story of humanity's expansion into space. Behind her walked Captain Rodriguez and Commander Okafor, both veterans who carried themselves with the easy confidence of people who had faced death and walked away. The Zephyrians waited in the station's main conference room, their crystalline forms arranged around a curved table that seemed to grow from the floor itself. Veltar's skin displayed a pattern of superior indifference as the humans entered. "Welcome, representatives of the species calling itself human," Veltar began, his words translated by the station's systems. "I am Ambassador Veltar, speaking for the Zephyrian hegemony and, by extension, the Galactic Cooperative. We have come to discuss your species' potential inclusion in galactic civilization." Admiral Chen took her seat without ceremony. "Admiral Sarah Chen, United Earth Defense Force. We appreciate the hegemony's interest in establishing relations." Veltar's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. "Indeed. However, there are certain requirements that must be met before a species can be granted membership in civilized space. Your technology must be brought up to acceptable standards. Your military forces must be placed under hegemony oversight. And your territorial claims must be adjusted to reflect galactic law." "Adjusted how?" Commander Okafor asked, her Nigerian accent crisp with suspicion. "Currently, your species claims sovereignty over this system and 3 colonial outposts. This is excessive for a species of your development level. The hegemony would be willing to grant you administrative control over your homeworld and 1 colonial mining operation, under our supervision, of course." The silence that followed was the kind that precedes storms. Admiral Chen's expression didn't change. But Captain Rodriguez felt the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. "Let me make sure I understand," Chen said slowly. "You want us to surrender our colonies, place our military under alien control, and accept supervision of our government. These are standard requirements for primitive species seeking membership in galactic civilization," Veltar replied, his skin shifting to a patronizing yellow. "The process typically takes several generations, but eventually your species will learn to contribute meaningfully to galactic society." Chen stood up slowly. "War Prime Zektoth, isn't it? You analyzed our military capabilities?" The golden Zephyrian skin flickered with surprise at being addressed directly. "I compiled a tactical assessment." "Yes." "And you concluded that we're primitive?" "Your technology is approximately 15,000 years behind current galactic standards," Zektoth replied stiffly. Chen nodded thoughtfully. "Tell me, War Prime, in your tactical assessment, did you happen to notice that every single human ship you scanned was armed?" "Yes, though your weapons are quite limited in..." "And did you notice that every human colony has defensive platforms?" "Crude installations, but yes." "And did your analysis mention that every human civilian ship carries some form of weaponry?" Zektoth's golden coloring began to shift toward a confused orange. "This was noted, though such paranoid behavior is typical of primitive species." Chen smiled, and there was something in that expression that made even the translated version cause discomfort in the aliens. "War Prime, let me explain something about humans. We come from a planet where everything wants to kill us. The weather, the animals, the plants, the geography, even the microscopic organisms. We've been fighting for survival since we climbed down from trees that were actively trying to poison us." She began walking around the table, her hands clasped behind her back. "You see primitive weapons. We see tools that work in any environment, can be manufactured anywhere, and don't fail when the power goes out. You see crude ships. We see vessels that can take damage and keep fighting. You see paranoid behavior. We see reasonable precautions." Veltar's skin was now cycling through rapid color changes, indicating severe distress. "Surely you're not suggesting that your species would consider military action against the hegemony?" I'm not suggesting anything, Chen replied calmly. I'm stating a fact. Humanity didn't claw its way up from Deathworld savagery to bow down to aliens who think pretty lights and polite words make them superior. She stopped directly in front of Veltar. Here's humanity's counteroffer. You withdraw from our space. You acknowledge our territorial sovereignty. And you tell your galactic cooperative that Earth is off limits unless they want to discover what happens when you threaten a species that evolved from persistence hunters. Zektoth made a sound that the translator couldn't interpret. You cannot seriously be threatening the entire galactic cooperative. We have a fleet of 10,000 vessels. And we have a species that turned warfare into an art form before we even reached space, Captain Rodriguez interjected. Want to know how many wars we fought just on our homeworld? The historians stopped counting at 30,000 conflicts. Commander Okafor leaned forward. You know what the beautiful thing about humans is? We don't fight to demonstrate superiority. We fight to win. Veltar's skin had turned a deep purple that indicated terror. This is madness. Your species cannot survive against galactic civilization. Maybe, Chen admitted. But we'll make sure that galactic civilization doesn't survive us either. She activated her communicator. Torres, send a priority message to Fleet Command. Code Black authorization. Aye, Admiral. Code Black confirmed. The alien delegation exchanged rapid communications in their musical language before Veltar's translator kicked back in. What is Code Black? Full military mobilization, Chen replied simply. Every human ship, every human colony, every human fighter. War footing. She looked directly at the War Prime. You wanted to see primitive weapons? You're about to get a demonstration. The Zephyrian delegation's crystalline skin flickered through colors that had no translation, as they realized they had made a critical error. They had expected submission from a primitive species. Instead, they had awakened something that had spent millions of years learning to kill everything that threatened it. Admiral Chen walked toward the exit, her officers falling into step behind her. You have 48 hours to clear our space, Ambassador. After that, any alien vessel in the Sol system will be considered hostile. As the humans left, Veltar stared at the empty conference room and wondered how a simple diplomatic mission had turned into a declaration of war. In the distance, Earth hung in space like a blue-green jewel, beautiful and deadly, home to a species that had just declared war on the galaxy itself. The Zephyrian fleet that had seemed so imposing just hours before now felt inadequate. 10,000 ships against a single species seemed like overwhelming force, but the humans had spoken about war with the casual confidence of experts discussing their craft. War Prime Zektoth's golden skin had faded to a pale yellow. Ambassador, I believe we may have made an error. Signal the hegemony, Veltar replied, his voice barely audible through the translator. Tell them the humans have rejected our terms. And? Veltar looked out at the blue world below, where several billion Deathworlders were receiving news that their species was now at war with galactic civilization. Tell them to prepare for a fight unlike anything they've ever seen. High Admiral Thexmore of the Galactic Cooperative Fleet stood in the command center of the flagship Luminous Dawn, his azure skin flickering with patterns of confusion and disbelief. The crystalline walls around him displayed tactical readouts from across human space, and what he was seeing made no sense according to everything the Cooperative knew about primitive species. Report, he commanded, his voice causing harmonic vibrations through the ship's organic systems. Science Prime Yeldana. Her silver skin indicating her high intellect caste moved her forearms in complex patterns as she manipulated the holographic displays. High Admiral, the human response has been unprecedented. Within 6 hours of the diplomatic incident, every human settlement, ship, and station has transitioned to what they call wartime protocol. "Show me," Thexmore ordered. The main display shifted to show the Sol system, but it wasn't the same system they had observed just days before. Where once there had been peaceful trade routes and civilian traffic, now there were defensive formations that seemed to materialize from nowhere. "Their industrial stations have ceased all civilian production," Yeldana continued. "Automated factories are now producing what appear to be weapons, ammunition, and military supplies at rates that should be impossible for their technology level." War Prime Kolventh, massive even by Zephyrian standards, stepped forward. His battle-scarred golden skin told the story of campaigns across 12 systems. "They're converting civilian vessels into warships. Cargo haulers are being fitted with weapons. Passenger ships are being transformed into troop transports. Even their mining vessels now carry military-grade equipment." "This makes no logical sense," Thexmore said, his skin cycling through confused purples. "Civilized species don't maintain the infrastructure for total war conversion. The economic impact alone would be devastating." Meanwhile, in the depths of the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter, Colonel Marcus Webb supervised the activation of construction platform Alpha 7. The massive facility had been disguised as a mining operation for over 30 years, but its true purpose was now revealed as blast shields retracted and assembly lines roared to life. "Status report, Chief," Webb called to Master Chief Petty Officer Elena Vasquez, a veteran of the Ganymede Rebellion whose cybernetic arm marked her as one of the survivors of the Deimos shipyard disaster. "Platform is at full operational capacity, sir," Vasquez replied, her voice carrying the distinctive accent of the Martian colonies. "We've got 48 fabrication lines running hot, and raw materials are flowing in from every mining operation in the belt. The boys and girls are pulling 12-hour shifts to get the new ships online." Webb nodded as he watched the first hull plates being assembled for what would become the UED's Retribution, a heavy destroyer designed specifically for fighting in the void. "What's our timeline for the first units?" "Optimistic estimate, 72 hours for the destroyers, a week for the cruisers, 2 weeks for the first battleship." Vasquez grinned, her smile holding the edge that came from surviving in environments that actively tried to kill you. "Of course, that's assuming we're building them to peacetime standards." "We're not," Webb replied grimly. "Strip out everything non-essential. Comfort features, recreational facilities, even the medical bays beyond basic trauma treatment. I want ships that can fight, not luxury yachts." Back on Earth, President Maria Santos stood in the Situation Room beneath Geneva, surrounded by holographic displays showing military mobilization across human space. General Park of the Space Marines, Admiral Okafor of the Defense Fleet, and Director Walsh of Colonial Security all provided updates on their respective forces. "Madam President," General Park began, his Korean accent still noticeable despite decades in space, "all Colonial Marine units are reporting ready status. We've recalled every unit from leave and activated all reserves. Total available ground forces, 2 million Marines, 4 million Army, and roughly 6 million Colonial militia." Admiral Okafor, her dark skin showing the ritual scars of her Igbo heritage, continued the briefing. "Fleet status is more complex. Our current active fleet consists of 200 frontline vessels, but our shipyards are working around the clock. With the emergency protocols activated, we're seeing production rates that exceed our most optimistic projections." President Santos studied the displays showing human colonies across 3 systems. "What about civilian evacuation?" "That's where it gets interesting, Madam President," Director Walsh interjected. "The colonists are refusing evacuation orders. Every single colony is requesting weapons shipments and military advisors. They want to fight." Far above Earth, Captain James Harrison stood on the bridge of the UED's Endurance, watching his crew prepare the ship for combat. The Endurance was one of the older vessels in the fleet, a heavy cruiser that had seen action in the Belter conflicts and the Proxima Centauri incident, but her crew had turned her into something special. Mr. Kim, he called to his tactical officer. What's the status on our special package? Lieutenant Kim, a young officer from the Luna shipyards, grinned as he checked his displays. The engineers finished installing the new railgun system this morning, sir. We're now carrying enough kinetic ordnance to level a small city. And our point defense? Upgraded with the latest human-designed systems. Close-in weapon systems that can track and engage multiple targets simultaneously. Engineering also rigged the fusion plant to overload on command, sir. Harrison raised an eyebrow. Overload? In case we're disabled and boarded, sir. The chief engineer calculated that a controlled fusion detonation would create a blast radius of approximately 5 kilometers. He called it, taking the bastards with us. The captain nodded slowly. It was a very human solution to the problem of capture. Make sure that capturing a human ship was more costly than destroying it outright. Meanwhile, in the Proxima Centauri system, the colonists of New Australia were implementing their own version of scorched earth tactics. Governor Rebecca Chen, Admiral Chen's younger sister, stood in the colony's command center watching her people prepare for siege. Status of the orbital platforms? She asked her military advisor, Colonel Thompson. All 6 platforms are online and armed. We've also deployed the asteroid field, Thompson replied with grim satisfaction. Every rock bigger than a football in a 20 million kilometer radius around the system has been tagged with either a sensor package or a kinetic warhead. What about the civilians? Ma'am, with respect, there are no civilians on New Australia anymore. Every man, woman, and teenager old enough to hold a rifle has been issued weapons and ammunition. The kids are running supplies and communications. Even the elderly are manning the manufacturing plants. Governor Chen looked out at the red sky of her world, where 3 moons hung like baleful eyes. Colonel, remind me why we called this place New Australia? Because it was supposed to be beautiful and peaceful, ma'am. Right. And why did we choose to colonize the most hostile planet we could find? Thompson's smile was savage. Because we're human, ma'am. We don't do easy. Back in space, the Galactic Cooperative Fleet was discovering the first lesson about human warfare. Humans didn't fight fair. Scout ships sent to reconnoiter human positions found themselves engaging not military vessels, but converted civilian ships that fought with desperate cunning. Captain Zextoth of the scout ship, Graceful Current, transmitted his emergency report to the fleet command. High Admiral, we have encountered a human vessel claiming to be a cargo hauler. It was armed with improvised weapons and fought until complete destruction rather than surrender. Describe these improvised weapons, War Prime Colventh demanded. They had mounted what appeared to be mining equipment to their hull, industrial cutting lasers, ore processing systems converted to projectile launchers, and some sort of device that ejected metallic debris at high velocity. High Admiral Thexmore's skin displayed patterns of incredulous orange. They armed a cargo ship with mining equipment? Yes, sir, and it was surprisingly effective. They managed to disable 2 of our escort vessels before we destroyed them. Did they attempt to communicate surrender? No, sir. Their final transmission was, and I quote, "Come get some, you crystal bastards." The report was filed and forwarded up the chain of command, but it was the first of many such encounters. Human ships didn't operate according to galactic conventions. They didn't form neat battle lines or engage in the ritualized combat that civilized species preferred. Instead, they attacked from asteroid fields, used debris clouds for cover, and seemed willing to ram enemy vessels if necessary. On the cooperative flagship, Science Prime Yeldana was updating her analysis of human capabilities. High Admiral, I'm forced to revise our initial assessments. The humans appear to have maintained a significant military infrastructure disguised as civilian operations. Explain. Their mining operations were actually materials gathering for military production. Their cargo vessels were designed with modular systems that allow rapid conversion to military roles. Their civilian space stations had hidden weapon batteries and defensive systems. War Prime Kolventh studied the tactical displays with growing unease. They planned for this. They've been preparing for war since they entered space. More than that, Yeldana continued, their entire society appears to be organized around the concept of warfare. Their entertainment includes detailed simulations of combat. Their sports are physical competitions designed to improve fighting ability. Their children are taught tactical thinking as part of basic education. High Admiral Thexmore was beginning to understand the scope of the problem. The Galactic Cooperative had been designed to deal with rational, civilized species that understood the benefits of surrender when faced with overwhelming force. Humans, apparently, didn't recognize the concept of overwhelming force. "What are our casualties so far?" he asked quietly. "In 12 hours of sporadic contact, we have lost 8 scout vessels, 3 escorts, and 1 frigate," Kolventh reported. "Human losses appear to be significantly higher, but they seem unconcerned about the casualty ratios." Unconcerned? Their communication intercepts suggest they view casualties as acceptable losses and measure success not by preservation of life, but by damage inflicted on enemy forces. The implications were staggering. The cooperative was fighting a species that didn't just accept casualties, but planned for them. Every human ship, station, and colony was prepared to fight to destruction rather than surrender, and each destroyed human position seemed designed to inflict maximum damage on its attackers. In the depths of space between systems, Admiral Chen stood in the CIC of the newly constructed battleship Ued's Vengeance, watching the tactical display that showed the positions of both fleets. Her flagship was unlike anything in the cooperative fleet, a massive wedge of armor and weapons designed not for elegant space combat, but for the brutal reality of war. "Ma'am," Commander Torres reported, "all task forces are reporting ready status. The trap is set." Chen nodded. The Galactic Cooperative was about to learn another lesson about human warfare. Humans were very, very good at setting traps. The enemy fleet was heading toward the Sol system, expecting to find a primitive species ready to surrender when faced with superior technology. Instead, they were about to encounter the full military might of a species that had spent its entire evolutionary history learning how to kill things that were bigger, stronger, and better equipped than they were. "Signal all units," Chen ordered. "Commence Operation Deathworld." The Galactic Cooperative Fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system, expecting to find a desperate enemy preparing for a hopeless last stand. High Admiral Thexmore stood in the command center of the luminous dawn, his azure skin displaying confident patterns as 10,000 ships materialized in perfect formation behind him. "Begin scan of the inner system," he ordered. "I want positions on all human vessels." Science Prime Yeldana manipulated the sensor arrays, her silver skin flickering with concentration. After several minutes, she turned to face the High Admiral, her colors showing deep confusion. "Sir, the inner system appears to be empty." "Empty?" "No human vessels are showing on sensors, no defensive platforms, no orbital installations. The system appears to have been abandoned." War Prime Kolventh moved his massive frame closer to the displays. "Run deep scans. Check for cloaked vessels or hidden installations." The minutes stretched as the most advanced sensors in galactic space probed the Sol system. Earth hung in space like a blue-green jewel, its surface showing normal population centers and industrial activity, but the space around it was eerily quiet. "Nothing, sir," Yeldana reported. "Either the humans have developed cloaking technology beyond our capabilities, or they have truly abandoned their space-based defenses." Thexmore's skin shifted to satisfied purple. "Then they are attempting to make their last stand on the planetary surface. A foolish decision, but it will minimize our casualties. Begin the advance to Earth." The massive fleet moved inward. 10,000 ships representing the combined might of 47 civilized species. Their formation was a thing of beauty. Cruisers and destroyers arranged in perfect geometric patterns around massive dreadnoughts. The entire formation moving with the precision that only advanced AI coordination could achieve. They had traveled halfway to Earth when the first human ship appeared on their sensors. It was alone, drifting apparently powerless between Mars and Earth. The vessel was one of their crude, heavy cruisers, showing obvious battle damage and no energy signatures except for basic life support. A crippled vessel, Thexmore mused. Perhaps survivors from their evacuation. We should take them prisoner for interrogation. Sir, a junior officer reported, his green skin indicating nervousness. The vessel is broadcasting on all frequencies. What message? It appears to be music, sir. Something they call rock and roll. Thexmore's mandibles clicked with amusement. Primitive to the end. Send a boarding party to... The transmission changed. A human voice, speaking in accented English, cut across the music. This is Captain Rodriguez of the UEDS Thermopylae. For any aliens listening to this recording, I have a message from humanity. On the screen, a scarred human face appeared. Captain Rodriguez was clearly injured, blood running down one side of his head, but his eyes burned with something the aliens had never seen before. Pure, concentrated defiance. You came to our home thinking we were primitives. You demanded we surrender our freedom and bow to your superiority. You made one mistake. Rodriguez smiled, and it was the expression of a predator. You forgot that humans don't know how to quit. The transmission ended. For a moment, the cooperative fleet continued its advance, unsure what to make of the strange message. Then Captain Rodriguez's ship exploded, but it wasn't the clean destruction of a damaged vessel losing structural integrity. The UEDS Thermopylae detonated with the fury of a miniature star, its fusion reactors overloaded in a cascade reaction that sent energy and debris racing outward at significant fractions of light speed. The blast alone wouldn't have been dangerous to the cooperative fleet at their distance, but the explosion served another purpose. It illuminated thousands of previously invisible objects floating in the space around Earth. What are those? Thexmore demanded, as his sensors suddenly detected masses of metal and machinery throughout the inner system. Asteroids, sir, Yeldana replied, her silver skin now cycling through alarmed orange patterns. They've moved asteroids throughout the system and, sir, they're armed. The asteroids began moving, their hidden engines firing as they accelerated toward the cooperative fleet. These weren't crude mining platforms hastily converted for war. They were purpose-built weapons of massive destruction, each one a fortress carrying enough firepower to challenge a dreadnought. How did they move so many asteroids without us detecting them? Kolventh demanded. They didn't move them recently, sir, Yeldana realized. These installations have been in place for decades. They've been preparing for this exact scenario since they first entered space. High Admiral Thexmore felt something he had never experienced in 2 centuries of warfare. Genuine fear. The humans hadn't fled or abandoned their defenses. They had created the largest military trap in recorded history and waited patiently for their enemies to fly directly into it. The first kinetic rounds arrived 3 minutes later. The humans had taken the simple concept of accelerating metal slugs to high velocity and refined it into an art form. Tungsten projectiles the size of shuttles slammed into cooperative ships at velocities that turned both projectile and target into expanding clouds of plasma. The elegant formations of the Galactic fleet dissolved into chaos as captains tried desperately to maneuver their vessels away from the incoming barrage. "Return fire!" Thexmore ordered. "Target those asteroid fortresses!" The cooperative fleet's energy weapons lanced out across space, but the asteroid fortresses had been designed by beings who understood that in space, everything was trying to kill you. Their armor was meters of solid rock and metal. Their redundant systems were buried deep in their cores. And when a fortress was finally destroyed, it didn't die quietly. Each human fortress was packed with enough conventional explosives to level a city. When their defenses finally failed, they detonated in controlled blasts designed to send debris in carefully calculated directions, turning destroyed fortresses into massive shotgun blasts that further damaged the attacking fleet. "Sir!" a junior officer called out, his skin flashing emergency red. "New contacts! Multiple human fleets emerging from hyperspace!" The tactical display exploded into chaos as Admiral Chen's trap revealed its full scope. Human task forces had been waiting in hyperspace at calculated points around the system. And now they emerged in perfect coordination to catch the cooperative fleet from multiple directions. The UEDS, Vengeance, led the largest task force, its massive bulk bristling with weapons that had been designed for one purpose: killing things larger and better armed than humans. Around it flew dozens of smaller vessels, each one crewed by beings who had grown up in an environment where a single mistake meant death. "All ships," Admiral Chen broadcast on open channels, "commence attack pattern Alpha. Remember, they wanted a war, so let's give them one they'll never forget." The human fleet didn't fight like anything in cooperative experience. They didn't form orderly battle lines or engage in the ritualized combat that civilized warfare required. Instead, they swarmed their enemies like pack hunters, using their superior maneuverability to stay inside the turning radius of larger ships while unleashing devastating close-range attacks. Human fighters, piloted by organic beings with reflexes honed by a lifetime of surviving in hostile environments, danced between energy beams that would have vaporized them instantly. They targeted specific systems, engines, weapons, command centers. When their missiles were expended and their guns empty, they rammed enemy vessels, their pilots shouting defiant battle cries right up to the moment of impact. Captain Harrison of the Endurance found himself facing a cooperative dreadnought 3 times his ship's mass. The logical response would have been to flee or call for support. Instead, he ordered his ship directly toward the enemy vessel's broadside. "Mr. Kim," he called to his tactical officer as energy beams seared the space around them, "prepare the special package." "Aye, sir. Fusion overload sequence armed and ready." Harrison watched the enemy ship grow larger in his view screen. The Endurance was dying around him, her armor boiled away by energy weapons, her crew fighting fires and radiation leaks. But she was still moving forward. "Sir," his helmsman called out, "we're too close to their point defense grid. They can't miss at this range." "Neither can we," Harrison replied grimly. "Mr. Kim, fire everything we have." The Endurance unleashed her entire arsenal in one devastating salvo. Railguns, missile batteries, and beam weapons fired simultaneously, overwhelming the dreadnought's defenses and punching through its armor in dozens of places. The cooperative ship began listing as its systems failed, but it was still combat-capable. "Ramming speed," Harrison ordered. The Endurance slammed into the dreadnought's midships section with the force of a small meteor. Both ships' hulls crumpled, atmosphere venting into space as emergency bulkheads tried to contain the damage. But the human ship had one advantage: its crew expected to die fighting. "Mr. Kim," Harrison called out as his bridge tilted at an impossible angle. "Initiate fusion overload." The Endurance reactor went critical in a controlled detonation that turned both ships into an expanding fireball. But just before the explosion, Harrison's final transmission echoed across the battlefield. "This is what humans do to bullies." Across the system, similar scenes played out as human crews demonstrated why their species had earned the name Deathworlders. They fought with a savage creativity that horrified their enemies. When their weapons failed, they used tools. When their tools broke, they used debris. When they ran out of debris, They used their ships as weapons. The tide of battle began to turn when War Prime Kolventh realized the scope of human preparation. The asteroid fortresses weren't just weapons platforms, they were production facilities. Even as the cooperative fleet destroyed them, they continued to manufacture and launch new weapons. Human engineering crews worked in the vacuum of space to repair battle damage while under fire. Human medical teams treated wounded crew members while their ships maneuvered through combat. "High Admiral," Kolventh reported, his golden skin now a pale yellow of defeat. "We're facing casualty rates of 30%. The humans are down to perhaps 40% of their original numbers, but their remaining ships are fighting more aggressively than ever." Thexmore studied the tactical display, watching his beautiful fleet formation dissolve into scattered groups of damaged ships. "How is this possible? They're primitives!" "No, sir," Science Prime Yeldana said quietly. "We were wrong. They're not primitives. They're something we've never encountered before, a species that evolved warfare as a survival trait." The final phase of the battle began when Admiral Chen's flagship engaged the cooperative command vessel. The Vengeance was a monster of human engineering, all armor and weapons with just enough life support to keep its crew alive. It absorbed punishment that would have destroyed any 3 normal ships while closing to point-blank range with the luminous dawn. "This is Admiral Sarah Chen," she broadcast on open channels as her ship traded devastating broadsides with the enemy flagship. "I want every alien in this system to remember this moment. You came here thinking humans were weak. You came here thinking we would surrender. You came here thinking we were primitives." A massive explosion rocked the Vengeance as cooperative energy weapons found her main reactor, but backup systems kept her fighting. "Let me tell you what humans really are. We're the species that crawled out of hell and made it beautiful. We're the species that looked at the universe and decided it wasn't trying hard enough to kill us." The luminous dawn began listing as human weapons found critical systems, but Thexmore refused to surrender. In his mind, the Galactic Cooperative represented order and civilization. These humans represented chaos and barbarism. Admiral Chen seemed to read his thoughts. "You want to know the difference between humans and the rest of the galaxy? When you find something that wants to kill you, you try to make friends with it. When we find something that wants to kill us, we kill it first." The final salvo from the Vengeance punched through the cooperative flagship's command section, sending the ship spinning out of control. But Chen wasn't finished. Her ship, barely holding together, moved alongside the crippled alien vessel. "Hi, Admiral Thexmore," she called over communication channels. "This is Admiral Chen. You have 10 minutes to order your surviving ships to withdraw from human space before I finish what you started." Thexmore, trapped in his damaged command center, looked around at the tactical displays showing his fleet in ruins. Of 10,000 ships, fewer than half remained combat-capable. His perfect formation had become a debris field stretching across the inner system. And the humans, despite suffering horrendous casualties, were still fighting. "Why?" he whispered into his communicator. "Why won't you just surrender? We offered you membership in galactic civilization." Chen's laugh was harsh, but not without sympathy. "Because, Admiral, we already have civilization. We built it ourselves, in the hardest place in the universe, and we're not giving it up to anyone." The Galactic Cooperative Fleet withdrew from the Sol system 12 hours later, leaving behind a debris field that would orbit the sun for centuries. Of the 10,000 ships that had arrived, only 6,000 limped away, many of them too damaged to fight again. The humans had lost over half their defending fleet, but they had proven a point that would echo throughout galactic civilization. Earth was off limits. Not because the humans were primitive, but because they were something far more dangerous. They were survivors. News of the battle spread across the galaxy within days, carried by cooperative survivors who spoke in awed whispers about the Deathworld species that had declared war on the entire galaxy and won. Other species began to reevaluate their assumptions about these primitive humans. Some, the wise ones, sent ambassadors offering trade agreements and mutual defense pacts. Others, the proud ones, began planning their own campaigns against human space. They would learn, as the cooperative had learned, that humanity didn't know how to lose. They only knew how to make their enemies pay such a terrible price for victory that defeat became preferable. In the rebuilt conference room of the diplomatic station, a new ambassador arrived to negotiate with humanity. This one came not with demands, but with an offer of mutual respect. Admiral Chen, her uniform now bearing new decorations earned in battle, sat across from Ambassador Reltar, whose species had not participated in the invasion. "Admiral," Reltar said, his cephalopod features carefully neutral, "my people offer formal recognition of human territorial sovereignty and a non-aggression pact." Chen nodded. "That sounds like a good start. May I ask," Reltar continued carefully, "what humans want from galactic civilization?" Chen smiled, and this time it was the expression of someone offering friendship rather than promising destruction. "The same thing we've always wanted, Ambassador. To be left alone to build our own future. And if other species threaten that future, then they'll learn what the Zephyrians learned," Chen replied simply. "Humans don't start fights, but we sure as hell finish them." Outside the station, Earth hung in space like a blue-green jewel, beautiful and deadly, home to a species that had looked at the universe and decided they belonged among the stars. The galaxy was a big place, full of wonders and dangers, but humanity had proven they could handle anything it threw at them. After all, they were Deathworlders.